The collect for Mass this morning, the collect is what we call the opening hymn, or rather the opening hymn is what we call the collect, sets the stage for our, if I can find the Mass, there we are, sets the stage for our meditation on the gospel, which is to prepare the way of the Lord, to make straight his path, so that low valleys are filled in and high hills are brought low. The collect, the petition in the collect is this: may no earthly undertaking hinder those who set out in haste to meet your Son. So there are two things to consider here. The first, what are we asking? That no earthly undertaking distracts us or gets in the way of our seeking and obtaining what we hope for, namely heaven. But for whom? For whom is the church asking this? Not for everybody. Not for everybody. For those who set out in haste to meet the Christ. The church here is not praying for the apathetic. Not praying for the listful. Not praying for those who just don't care. Not praying for those who don't love. Praying for those who have been energized by the Spirit, received the Word of God, and has gone out in haste to meet Him. Like so many parables that Christ tells of Himself, the bridegroom, coming, and those heralding, those watchful, those going out to meet Him, those enter into the feast with Him. For those there is no obstacle that will overcome them in entering in to dine with the Christ. So as we consider, okay, well, what earthly undertakings hinder us, we first have to ask ourselves the question and know for certain, am I one who has gone out in haste to meet the Christ? Or do I just not care? Because there are people in this room that just don't care. They're here for a slavish reason. They're here because it's a rule. They're here because somebody told them to be here. Somebody made them come. And they're here, but they just don't care. You need to define for yourself, to know for sure, because your salvation depends on it. Are you one who is just punching a ticket? Or are you one who has woken up in life, woken up this morning and gone out in haste to meet the Christ? Did you prepare yourself well to come here to meet Him? Right? We've got these things now that we're kind of saying to help you consider and prepare, help you to go out in haste. Literally, when you come to Mass, you're coming in haste, or you're coming to meet the Christ. Whether you're coming in haste or not, that's to be determined, right? Did you think at all about coming here to meet the Christ before you left this morning? Or was it just autonomous? Was it just a thing that you always do, and so you gave no thought to it? Did you prepare, as we've suggested, by examining your conscience, by reading the readings ahead of time, by dressing in a way that is reflective of where you were headed? Or did you just put on, your tennis shoes and sweatpants? Right? Did you come here did you leave in time to get here before Mass started? You know what? I don't think it's 8:17 right now. And I'm pretty sure it's safe to say nobody has showed up 15 minutes late. Which means if everybody leaves 15 minutes earlier, everybody will be here on time. But oh my God, what would I do with those 7 minutes that I got here before Mass started? That can be a scary thing if you don't know how to pray. But if you don't know how to pray, if you don't know what to do with those 7 minutes, if you got here 7 minutes early because you had a 7-minute delay but left 15 minutes earlier, so you're still here early, if you don't know what to do with those 7 minutes, that's a good indication that you're not one of those who are leaving in haste to meet the Lord. Think about that. If you're afraid of if you're afraid of getting here 7 minutes early because you wouldn't know what to do with the time, you might not be one of those running in haste to meet the Lord. And I'm not judging anybody here. These are questions I'm asking for you to answer for yourself because they're really important. Right? Let's assume, though, for the rest of this homily that we're all here gone out in haste to meet the Lord. And we want to know how to prepare his way. We want to know how to prepare the way of the Lord so that he can come, and he can come without delay to meet us where he wants to meet us. He's leaving heaven, so to speak, literally at the second coming, right? But well, I suppose literally even still today. I'll explain something. We usually talk about two comings of Christ, right? Sorry, my boot soaked up some water on the way over here, and so now I sound like a squeaky toy every time the good thing here is it's causing me not to take myself too seriously, because I sound like a dog is chewing on a toy, but maybe you can't hear it, but I certainly can. The first coming of Christ was in the incarnation, when he was born of the Virgin Mary and laid in a manger. The second coming, as we talk about it, is the second coming. Christ coming back on a horse with the sword all tatted up, and he's like going to come and he's going to take names and kick butts, right? He's going to come and gather all those who were his friends, and he's going to say to those who were not his friends, come before me and I'm going to slay you, right? That's what he's going to do in the second coming. But there's a middle coming that the church fathers talk about, and that's the persistent sort of cascade of grace, of the coming of Christ that we get each and every day. That while Christ has gone away, he did ascend, and we can properly say Christ has gone away and will come again. We can equally and just as truly say Christ is still with his church. There's still this middle coming of Christ where he constantly pours out his grace upon us, right? This is the way that we're going to consider making straight the path, right, to the Lord. This middle way. Today is the day of the Lord. What's Paul say? Today is the day. This is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it, right? Why? Because Christ is still coming on this day, right? So how do we prepare the way of the Lord for this day? To make straight the path this day that we can receive the Christ. Because where does he want to be received by us? He wants to be received by us in our conscience, in our soul. Poorly said, but more commonly said, in our hearts, right? It's where he wants to be received by us. So how do we prepare that way? Well, first thing we have to understand is what is the literal image that John the Baptist, that the prophet Isaiah, that the church is using here about preparing the way of the Lord? Well, in ancient times when a king went out and he was going to go visit somebody, people went out days, weeks, months sometimes before his journey to make sure the road he was going to take was well maintained and it was safe. They'd go out, these road builders, and they'd be like, there's a pothole, there's a pothole, there's a pothole, and they would fill it in anticipation of the king riding down that road so the poor king's little carriage wouldn't get jostled too much, right? And if there was a steep valley, and it was like, that king, the king's carriage is heavy, it's got armor plating and gold and jewels and stuff on it, it's probably carrying a bunch of gold and jewels and hidden compartments everywhere, right? It's going to go down that hill, it's going to get ahead of the horses. Can't have that, so we need to build that up a little bit so it's not quite so low. And then, gosh, to climb out of that hill, can't be doing that. Can't have the king leaning all the way back in his chair. He's going to fall asleep. So we got to lower that hill down a little bit so he has a more gradual grade. God forbid he goes up 14 degrees, right? It's like, so they're actually cutting down hills. They're actually filling in valleys. They're actually building bridges where bridges had been washed out the season before. They're actually filling in potholes, literally making straight the way of the Lord, the way of the King. But they're doing more than that too. They're also making sure that road is safe. They're sending out their knights ahead of time, their outriders, to make sure that there are no bandits in camp to ambush the king. Right? We see this today in our modern sense. Nothing has changed. When the king, or in our case the president, goes anywhere, people go out ahead of him. They secure the area. They check the route. They make sure there's no pot. Literally, they check and make sure there's no pot. They will fill in a pothole because the president is driving down the road. Just look at what they did for that evil communist dictator that came to San Francisco. They cleaned up the whole doggone city. San Francisco. Cleaned up the whole city for him. Right? This is what we do when important people come. We make things look nice. And I'm going to go right back to it, but I'm going to spring right back from it too. This is why we do talk about our clothing. The king is coming. We're making straight the path. We do have to consider that. That's a legitimate thing to consider. You might gripe about why I'm griping about it, but that's a legitimate thing to consider, right? Because our exterior reflects the interior. That's also why we kneel and why we stand, because our exterior reflects the interior position of our souls. You cannot tell me that your soul is clean if you're living in squalor on the outside, right? So, what happens when the president came here recently because one of the Carter family died and they came for the funeral. I had a buddy that was up on the air traffic tower on Overwatch. It was kind of cool. He said he was freezing though because it was so cold and windy that night. But so what happens is that they plan the route, right? So they check the road. When we're talking spiritually about preparing the way of the Lord, what's a pothole? A pothole is sin, right? Because there's supposed to be a road there, and there's not. There's an absence of some good that's meant to be there. That's what vice is, right? So when we're thinking about preparing the way of the Lord, we need to think about filling in the potholes of our own character, the potholes of our conscience, right? Where is there vice? Where is there an absence of something where there should be a positive something, where there should be virtue? Right? Or where there should be grace, and there's not grace, there's only sin. That's what grace is. Grace is the asphalt that fills in the pothole of our soul. So when we notice and we do our examination of conscience to prepare the way of the Lord, to make sure the road of our conscience is clear for the Lord, we do our examination of conscience and check for those potholes. When we see those potholes, we need to go and find the material of God's grace to fill those potholes in. And where do we find that? We find that in the sacrament of confession. That's where our potholes get filled in. Man, as soon as I said confession, like 8 heads dropped. Never seen that before. Pay attention to that. I'm paying attention to it, right? The sacrament of confession is where we go and we have those potholes filled in, so that road is smooth for the Lord to arrive in haste, to arrive quickly, right? There are other ways that the road is prepared, as we've mentioned. When evil lurks, we need our spiritual snipers up on the towers to take care of it, right? When the president's riding down the road, man, they got snipers everywhere. They got Overwatch, or wherever he's going to be staying, they secure that whole area. If a bad guy comes in, boom, no more bad guy. President's safe, king's safe, right? We have to consider this for our souls as well, right? We do this by considering near occasions of sin, those things in our lives that are commonplace but that cause us to sin, right? We have to kill those things. We have to destroy those things. We have to avoid those things, right? This is where our spiritual overwatch comes in, right? Where are the areas in my life that if I do them, it creates a pothole, right? Like an IED. Right? Or like some bad guy waiting in ambush. Dante, in his second volume of his poem, The Divine Comedy, he's talking about purgatory, and he's having an allusion back to the Garden of Eden, and there's a serpent that's winding its way through. It's a very ominous scene. There's a serpent winding its way through the tall grass, like sneaking up on the souls in purgatory. Of course, the angels there have overwatch, and they see from their height this angel, and they swoop down, or they see from their heights this serpent coming through. They swoop down and they destroy the serpent, right? We have to look at our lives, day to day, how we live and where we live and what we do. What are the areas in our lives that should not be there? Because when they're there, they tempt us to sin. Just like for an alcoholic, it'd be a really bad idea to go to a bar to have dinner just because they have really good hot wings, right? Is that reasonable? Right? Because you're putting yourself in a near occasion of sin. You know you have a weakness, a temptation towards the drink. You've got it under control now, but if you go out with your friends to to Nelligan's or O'Brady's or whatever, the local pub down the road, you might be able to make it out of there without having a drink, but you might not. Is it worth it? You don't know? You guys don't? So alcoholism, I'll tell you about alcohol. I'll tell you what it is, because right? Alcoholism is where you're addicted to alcohol, and a lot of people work really hard for years to get out of that addiction, right? And it doesn't take much to tip that back. So if that's the case, would it be worth it for them to go get some hot wings in a place where there's all kinds of alcohol all over the place? No. We call that a near occasion of sin, right? This is where, for us to prepare the way of the Lord in our conscience, we have to be aware of our near occasions of sins. What are the things that I do in my day-to-day or in my life that lead me to my weakness, that lead me to my sins, right? It might be a really bad idea for some of you to go to an all-you-can-eat buffet. It might be a really bad thing for some of you to take your phones or your tablets to bed with you. Not just for the most nefarious reason of pornography, but also because you'll just lull yourself to sleep by scrolling. Right? That's a sin. Believe it or not. It's a horrible waste of time and a destruction of your mind and filling your mind with all sorts of stuff to just be addicted to your phone and just scrolling all the time. Right? If you're addicted to your phone, it's a bad idea to go to bed with your phone. Right? Gossip's another one. If you have a weakness to gossip, what are the near occasions in your life that lead you to gossip? And get out of them, get away from them, get that spiritual overwatch to pull trigger on that thing and send that and destroy the thing that is threatening you. Actually change your life. If you're a person who's running out in haste to meet the Lord, you'll change your life. You'll have the momentum, you'll have the inertia to actually change the direction of your life. If you're sitting stagnant like a boat sitting, can you steer a boat sitting still in the water? So you ever thought about that? Boat sitting still in the water, you can crank that wheel all day long. It's not going to turn, will it? Nope. If a boat's moving forward but in the wrong direction, could you steer it back to the right direction? Yes, you can. Do you know what I use sometimes to steer boats in the right direction? Because they're sitting still and the only way I can jumpstart it is to light a fire, I use anger. Sometimes getting somebody angry at me is what it takes to get them moving so that they can turn. I want you to understand that because I don't like people being angry at me, but I'm willing to let people be angry at me if that's what it takes to get their motor running. Right? So we've got filling in the holes, which is the sin in our life. Filling in the potholes. We do that through confession. We have our spiritual overwatch, which is keeping track of all of the temptations, all of those serpents, all of the bandits, the bad guys that are sitting in ambush on either side of the road, and we are seeing them before they happen, and we are avoiding them, or in the more direct, literal way, we're shooting them. We've got our snipers up there, and they're shooting them and getting them out of the way, or we just kind of veer out of the way. Whatever we want to do with that. The last thing that we consider here is, when the president's driving down the road, is everybody else in the city happy? Nobody else in the city is happy. Why? Because traffic has been stopped. Normal, everyday, good old-fashioned Atlanta traffic stopped. Cross streets are stopped. All the lights are green. There's police escorts to make sure that he does not have to stop. There are times in our lives where making straight the way of the Lord requires not some extraordinary act of grace, not some huge filling in potholes or sniping snakes in grass, but just stopping the cross traffic. Things in our lives that aren't bad, but they're just too busy. It's just too much. I don't know who my husband is anymore. I don't know who my wife is anymore. I don't know how to talk to my kids anymore because we've just been going nonstop. Working too many hours, playing too many sports. Whatever it is in our lives, it's just going, and we don't have time for each other. If we don't have time for each other, I promise you're not going to make time for the Lord. Because He always takes second seat. It's always easier to relate to people that are sitting right in front of us than it is oftentimes to relate to the Lord, right? If you don't have time for each other, you're not going to have time for the Lord. So when we're talking about making way for the Lord, running out in haste to meet him, we have to also not just look at the bad things in our lives, but look at the good things in our lives and just ask, do I have these things out of order? Am I trying to do too much of these things? How do I stop the cross traffic so that the Lord can make a beeline to my soul? He doesn't have to be like a Frogger, bloop, 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 trying to get across to my soul and getting hit by the Mack truck of my lacrosse tournament, or getting hit by the Mack truck of my OT, or getting hit by the Mack truck of whatever else it is out there that's keeping you from spending the time to just be a human being. That's why this season of Advent is so important. And in a particular way, these three things are what Advent calls us to focus on. Examining our conscience and filling in those potholes. Setting up our spiritual overwatch to avoid the near occasions of sins in the way that we've got our lives structured. Where are those near occasions of sin? And equally as important, stopping the cross traffic, turning all the lights green, and making a way for the Lord uninhibited. If we do those things, then what the church asks for us will be granted. That no earthly undertaking may hinder us from receiving what we desire. We desire heaven. Heaven begins with Christ coming to us, knocking on the door of our soul, us opening the door, and welcoming him in to dine with us.